For 20 years, Gunsmoke ruled the American television landscape with an iron fist. It was more than a Western. It was a weekly ritual for millions of families who gathered around their television sets to watch Marshal Matt Dillon keep the peace in Dodge City, Kansas. And at the center of it all stood James Arness, tall, composed, and universally praised as one of the most professional and decent leading men Hollywood had ever produced. Colleagues respected him. Crew members admired him. Guest stars marveled at how comfortable he made everyone feel. In an industry notorious for its egos and backstage drama, James Arness was considered something of a rare breed. But here's the question that has lingered for decades among diehard fans of the show. If James Arness was so easy to work with, so warm and professional, then why did one particular co-star make him quietly wish things were different? And more importantly, who was that co-star, and what was really happening behind the scenes of one of television's most beloved productions? The answer might surprise you, because the story behind that hidden tension, that unspoken friction on the Gunsmoke set, is not the story most people think it is. It is messier, more human, and ultimately far more fascinating than any script the show's writers ever produced. To understand the friction that existed on the Gunsmoke set, you first have to understand James Arness himself, who he was before he ever strapped on a marshal's badge, and what shaped him into the man his colleagues would come to know over 2 decades of working together. James Arness was born James King Arness on May 26, 1923, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His roots were Norwegian and German, and there was something unmistakably solid about him from the very beginning, a groundedness that war would test and ultimately deepen. When he was drafted into the United States Army in 1943, he served with the 3rd Infantry Division and was thrown into one of the most brutal campaigns of World War II, the Allied invasion of Anzio, Italy, in January 1944. The fighting there was savage and unrelenting. Arness was severely wounded in his right leg and foot by enemy fire during the battle. The injuries were serious enough to require multiple surgeries and months of hospitalization before he was finally honorably discharged in January of 1945. For his courage under fire, he was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. Those wounds never truly healed. Throughout his entire run on Gunsmoke, Arness dealt with chronic leg pain that often became acute, particularly when scenes required him to mount horses or walk for extended periods. The production team quietly adapted the shooting schedule around his physical limitations, filming scenes that required heavy movement in the early morning hours before the pain intensified. He never complained publicly. He never made his suffering anyone else's problem. He simply showed up and did the work every single time. That kind of quiet resilience was the foundation of the man. And it was that same man, patient, disciplined, and loyal to his bones, who walked onto the Gunsmoke set in 1955 and began building something extraordinary with a group of actors who would become, as they themselves often said, more like family than colleagues. From the earliest days of the series, Gunsmoke assembled a core cast that would define American television for a generation. There was Dennis Weaver as the endearing, limping Deputy Chester Good. There was Amanda Blake as a spirited and independent Miss Kitty Russell, the saloon owner who held a quiet but unmistakable flame for the marshal. And then there was Milburn Stone, the veteran character actor who brought the gruff but warm-hearted Doc Adams to life with extraordinary skill for all 20 seasons of the show. On paper, these were the people who made Gunsmoke what it was. In practice, at least in the beginning, not all of them got along. And the most significant, most documented clash on that celebrated set was not the one fans might expect. It was not between Arness and Amanda Blake, despite what some sensational accounts have suggested over the years. It was between James Arness and Milburn Stone, and it began almost immediately when the cameras started rolling in 1955. Stone arrived on the Gunsmoke set as a seasoned, disciplined professional. He had spent decades working in Hollywood, accumulating a reputation for taking his craft seriously and expecting the same from everyone around him. He had firm ideas about what professional behavior on a television set looked like, and he was not shy about enforcing those standards, at least in his own mind. James Arness, by contrast, was still finding his footing as a lead of a major television production. He was younger, more relaxed, and had a personality that skewed naturally toward humor and levity. He had a well-known habit of making jokes between takes to ease tension and keep the atmosphere on set light. During rehearsals in particular, Arness had a tendency to sit around whistling, making noise, and generally behaving in a way that Stone found not just irritating but genuinely disrespectful to the work. As documented in David R. Greenland's book The Gunsmoke Chronicles, a new history of television's greatest Western, Stone's frustration with Ayers built slowly over the first couple of seasons and eventually hardened into something much stronger. "I felt he did not belong in the business at all," Stone later admitted bluntly. That was not mild annoyance. That was a serious professional judgment, and Stone carried it around in silence for longer than most people realized. What finally broke the tension was a confrontation. A real one. The details have been recounted in various interviews over the years, but the substance is always the same. Stone, pushed past his limit by Ayers' behavior during a rehearsal, let loose. He confronted Ayers directly and angrily, making no attempt to soften his words. He made it clear, loudly and unmistakably, that he found the style of the show deeply unprofessional. According to Stone's own account, he told Ayers in no uncertain terms what he thought of his conduct, essentially that he had no business being where he was if he couldn't be bothered to take the work seriously. Ayers, according to everyone who witnessed it or heard about it afterward, did something almost no one expected. He did not get defensive. He did not strike back. He did not dismiss Stone's anger or walk away. He stood there, let Stone finish, looked him in the eye, and said quietly, "Milburn, you're absolutely right." That was it. 4 words. But they changed everything. Stone, who had braced himself for a fight, and by his own admission was somewhat afraid of what the physically imposing Ayers might do in response, was disarmed completely. "I had embarrassed the hell out of him," Stone later said, but Jim stood there and took it and then had the guts to say that. The simple honesty of the acknowledgement was something Stone had not expected, and it cracked the wall of resentment he had built up over 2 years of frustration. From that moment forward, something shifted between them. The irritation faded. In its place came something much more durable, genuine mutual respect. Ayers, to his credit, did change. He took the set more seriously and began channeling his natural humor in ways that supported rather than disrupted the work. Stone, for his part, began to see his co-star not as a liability but as a talent he had badly underestimated. Years later, Stone spoke to TV Guide and offered an assessment of Ayers that was nothing short of a complete reversal. "I spent the first 2 years on Gunsmoke despising Jim's lack of professionalism," he said. "Now I say his acting has reached classical proportions." Coming from Milburn Stone, who did not give out compliments carelessly, that statement was remarkable. He also told the Los Angeles Times, "Jim is the star on and off the set, and we never had a serious quarrel or impasse." The man who had once concluded that Ayers did not belong in the industry at all now considered him one of the finest actors he had ever worked alongside. But understanding the Gunsmoke set means understanding that friction between Stone and Ayers was not the only complicated dynamic in play. The cast of Gunsmoke was a collection of strong personalities, and strong personalities have a way of rubbing against each other, especially in the pressure cooker environment of a weekly television production. Amanda Blake, who played the beloved Miss Kitty Russell for 19 seasons, was herself a strong-willed woman who knew exactly what her presence meant to the show. She was warm, generous, and deeply committed to her character, but she also understood her own value, and she was not afraid to make that known. According to a 1964 interview in TV Mirror, Blake recalled a day on the Gunsmoke set that pushed her past her limit. She had arrived early, sat in the makeup chair, endured the full process of getting into costume and character, and then spent the entire day waiting to be used. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, she had not spoken a single line of dialogue or appeared in a single scene. She stood up, announced to no one in particular that she was leaving, and walked off the set. But here is the interesting part of that story. When Blake later reflected on what made the experience bearable, and what made 20 seasons on the same show not just manageable but genuinely joyful, she kept coming back to the same person. James Arness. "The big reason the show is still fun to do is Jim," Blake said. "Is just marvelous. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He relaxes everybody." Without his energy, she admitted, there would have been far more outbursts like the one that drove her off the set that afternoon. She called him a true gentleman. She credited his humor and his generosity with creating an environment where the work felt worth doing even on the hardest days. That is a striking thing to consider. The same qualities that initially drove Milburn Stone to distraction, the levity, the jokes, the refusal to be always serious, were the very qualities that Amanda Blake credited with saving the show's atmosphere. The difference of course, is that Arness learned when to apply them and when to step back. He grew into the role of not just leading man, but actual leader of the production in every meaningful sense. The relationship between Blake and Stone had its own complicated beginning, one that is worth noting because it illustrates just how many different kinds of tension were simmering beneath the polished surface of Gunsmoke's early seasons. Blake admitted openly that she did not initially like Milburn Stone, not because of his personality, but because of billing. In the cast hierarchy, Stone received third billing, which was a position Blake felt she deserved. It was a professional grievance, the kind that might seem small from the outside but can feel enormous when you are building a career and trying to establish your place in the pecking order. As detailed by MTV's reporting on the cast dynamic, the billing dispute created a quiet but real tension between the two actors in those early years. Stone, for his part, had no idea Blake resented him. As he put it himself, all I knew was that she laughed at my jokes and that was good enough for me. Once Dennis Weaver departed the series after 9 seasons, the billing hierarchy shifted, and with it, so did the relationship. Blake and Stone ultimately became close friends, genuine ones, the kind who celebrated together on set and spoke warmly of each other in interviews for years afterward. "We're almost like family now," Blake told journalists at the time. "We have parties on the set with the crew members whenever there's a special occasion. As far as I know, there's nothing like it in show business." What emerged from all of this friction, all of these early disagreements and adjustments and confrontations, was something genuinely unusual in the history of American television, a cast that actually became a family. Not in the way that publicists describe casts as families, using the word as a marketing tool. A real family, complete with the arguments, the jealousies, the misunderstandings, and the deep, abiding loyalty that real families contain. At the center of that family was James Arness. Not just as a star, but as a human glue that held the production together across 2 extraordinary decades. Both Stone and Blake, in their own separate accounts, pointed to Arness as a man who set the tone and kept the show worth making. Stone credited him with having the kind of star presence that elevated everyone around him, and, crucially, with being the kind of star who used that leverage generously. "He goes through the script and changes the lines to give us more to do," Stone noted. How many stars do you find doing that? That detail is telling. In most productions, the lead actor protects his own screen time jealously. Arness did the opposite. He used his position to create more opportunities for his colleagues, to make the ensemble stronger, and to ensure that the show felt like a genuine collective achievement rather than a one-man showcase. It was, by any measure, an unusual form of professional generosity. By the time Gunsmoke finally ended in 1975, after 20 seasons and 635 episodes, the cast had been through more together than most people experience in a lifetime. They had navigated the transition from black and white to color, from 30-minute to 60-minute episodes, from the cultural certainties of the Eisenhower era to the social upheaval of the early 1970s. They had lost colleagues, welcomed new ones, and adapted to changing audience tastes without ever losing the essential spirit of what made the show work. When the cancellation finally came, it arrived without warning. No formal farewell. No emotional final shoot. The cast and crew filmed what they believed was just another episode, and only learned through newspaper reports and trade publications